Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. I'm Gary Michuta. Welcome to the show. It's great to be with you today. You have now entered into the Apologetics Zone, Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo. And great show in store for you today, indeed. Welcome back into the dojo. We're going to be talking with Anthony Digmann. If you remember, Anthony was on the show, and he's not only a fantastic dynamic speaker, but he's also developed a program of apologetics that he teaches youth and young adults that is really cool. It's high impact, and it's not flowery at all. It jumps straight into the depths with the first subject, which is science and faith. So I asked Anthony to come on the show, and maybe he could walk us through the paces of how to explain to people that science and faith go together, and that the Catholic faith and believing in God is rational. So he's going to join us on the other side of the break. As always, we're going to have our exercises, such as the Finding the Fallacy. And by the way, the Finding the Fallacy for today is the No True Scotsman Fallacy. That's right, the No True Scotsman Fallacy. And also, we're going to meet an early church father, as we do every episode here at Hands-On Apologetics. And to meet the early father is a great early father. He is Gregory the Great. So lots in store for us today. And if you have any questions, especially if maybe you're involved with youth ministry, maybe you trying to introduce apologetics to your parish, Anthony Digmann is the man to talk to. So you can give us a call when he comes on the show at 888-526-2151. That is 888-526-2151. Love to hear from you. And, as always, you can email us. Maybe you have questions. Maybe you're starting a group, but you just can't get to the phone to give us a call. So shoot us an email at questions@handsonapologetics.com. That's the best way to get a hold of me, folks. Questions@handsonapologetics.com. Comes straight to the dojo mailbox, and I check it every single day. And I reply, too. So love to hear from you. Got some great emails, by the way, in the dojo mailbox. I'm just waiting for a day to clear on the schedule. We have so many great guests in store. And also, it's time for our shout-outs on social media, those watching live stream on Facebook and YouTube. Hello, everybody. Oh, wow, look at the emojis. Wow, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah, that's great. I love that section of the dojo over to this side of the screen right here. Trust me, I try to keep an eye on the forum. For those who watch live stream, it's not much to watch. You're looking at me, down here in the dojo. And to my right is the live feed for YouTube. So I try to keep an eye off to the side just to see what's going on in the chat room. And so, unfortunately, when I have a guest and I start staring off to the right side of the screen, like over here, it looks like I'm bored or something, but actually I'm engaged with the guest. I just want to see what's cooking in the dojo social media center. So just FYI for those listening. And also on the show, whenever something pertinent comes up in terms of apologetics, I try to share it with you. And I wanted to let you know that at an ordinary public consistory on July 1st, Pope Francis has announced the canonization of Blessed Cardinal John Henry Newman and 4 other blesseds. And the Mass will take place at St. Peter's Square on Sunday, October 13, 2019. Now, John Henry Cardinal Newman, an important literary figure, especially apologetics. He was part of the Oxford movement last century, wrote some very important books, and he's responsible for massive conversion within the Anglican Church, and his influence is still felt today. In fact, I know several people who came into the church through John Henry Cardinal Newman's writings. And by the way, we did a podcast, well, not a podcast, we did a broadcast, what am I saying, on John Henry Cardinal Newman, and specifically his work, Essay on the Development of Christian Doctrine, with the one and only Carl Keating. So if you guys want to check that out, since now, his canonization is now on the docket, just go to virginmostpowerfulradio.org, click on our shows, slide down to Hands on Apologetics, and look up June 21st, that episode with Carl Keating talking about essays on the development of Christian doctrine. You can learn a little bit about this incredible soon-to-be saint. So, yeah, well, you do make my day with the dojo explosions, by the way, folks. So, or not dojo, emoji explosions. I hope the dojo doesn't explode. All right, so great news on that front. So why don't we jump to the Finding the Fallacy, which is kind of a fun one. Today is the No True Scotsman Fallacy, which is purely an informal fallacy which attempts to protect the universal generalization from counterexamples by changing the definition in an ad hoc fashion to exclude the counterexample. So it's another name for the No True The No True Scotsman fallacy is the moving the goalpost fallacy. In other words, you kind of redefine your way as counterexamples, counter evidence is given. Now here's the classic. This is the classic example. It's Angus puts sugar on his porridge, and then a friend of his says, "No true Scotsman puts sugar on his porridge, and therefore Angus is not a true Scotsman." Okay, or put another way, you could say Scotsmen eat their porridge without sugar, and then somebody brings up a counterexample. Angus puts sugar on his porridge, but he's Scottish. Then the person will say, well, no quote-unquote true Scotsman would ever put sugar on his porridge. So in other words, it's kind of changing the definition as you go. You lay out a definition, and then when a counterexample comes up, well, then now you're narrowing it down to a different kind of definition. Here's a better example, I think, that comes from the realm of apologetics. Someone could say, when a person comes to faith, then they're saved. Okay. Now, someone may say, well, I know this particular person who came to faith and was saved, but later on in life they repudiated their faith and died committing serious sins. Well, the person will say, well, see, they didn't have quote-unquote true faith. Or they might say, well, see, they weren't quote-unquote true Christian. Why? Because they're changing the goalpost. It's an example of the No True Scotsman fallacy. So something to keep in mind, folks, when we're listening to arguments, get our critical thinking skills up and running so that you can think through some of these arguments. Let's jump to the Meet the Early Church Father. It's Gregory the Great, Gregory the First, who reigned between AD 590 and 604. Now, Pope St. Gregory I was born in Rome in the year 540. He was the son of a celebrated and wealthy family. Early in life, he held political office in Rome and seemed to have a brilliant secular career before him. But he was wrestling inward with the problems of the evangelical councils and whether being a member of the city of God really fit with being a resident in a secular city. So he finally renounced all his worldly aspirations, sold his inherited possessions, and proceeded to distribute to the poor. He built 7 monasteries with that, and the last one he occupied himself. In fact, he practiced asceticism to the point where he actually started to destroy his health and endanger his very life during these ascetical years in his own home-built monastery. But in a comparatively short time, however, in this monastic retreat, he was called on by Pope Benedict I to serve as a regional deacon, and then Benedict's successor, Pope Pelagius II, made Gregory in 579 an ambassador of sorts to Constantinople. and only in 585 did Gregory was able to return to his monastery where he was made an abbot. When Pope Pelagius died in the plague in February of 590, Gregory was called to succeed him by unanimous vote and acclaimed by the Roman clergy, Senate, and people. So everybody wanted Gregory as Pope. And he tried to escape it like any good saint did, would. And but nevertheless, he was consecrated September 3rd, 590. And Gregory reigned as Bishop of Rome for 14 years. And by the way, he undertook a lot of reforms. For example, he reformed the liturgy, as John the Deacon wrote of Gregory I, that he revised the liturgy of the pre-Tridentine Mass, removing many things, changing a few, and adding some. He also developed a form of liturgical music known as, wait for it, Gregory the Great's Gregorian chant. Yeah, so Gregorian chant, which, by the way, is still making hit records, or I should say CDs. Boy, I'm dating myself. So Gregory institutes that. Now, just as a side note, by the way, Gregory the Great is one of only two popes who are given the title the Great. Leo the Great, his predecessor of a century and a half, and Gregory himself has that title. And so his impact on the papacy had ramifications throughout the Middle Ages. He laid the foundations for the medieval papacy that governed the Western world. And that is our Meet the Early Church Father for today, Pope St. Gregory the Great. Coming up on the other side of the break, folks, Anthony Digmann comes into the dojo. We're going to talk about science and the faith. You don't want to miss it. Stay tuned. You're listening to Hands On Apologetics.
This is Terry Barber reminding you there's a women's conference coming up September 7th, 2019 at the Sacred Heart Chapel. Mary Danielle Barber will be speaking along with Barbara Nicolosi. They're going to be talking about true femininity. Be who you are. This is going to be for your daughters, your mothers. Every woman should be at this conference. And the way to do it is go to virginmostpowerfulradio.org or call 877-526-2151. Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
scientifically, showing that the faith is rational, that it certainly stands up to science. In fact, science and religion go hand in hand together. And to walk us through this, we have master apologist Anthony Digmann join us. Anthony is the husband and father of a young family. He's a Catholic speaker, author, and educator. He has appeared internationally on Catholic television and radio, such as EWTN and Radio Maria. Anthony is also the author of Using the Force, Star Wars and Catholicism, also Demonology, Exorcism, and Holiness, and Signs of Contradiction, Contraception, Family Planning, and Catholicism. Anthony has a master's degree in theology, and he served the church professionally in Catholic schools, parish ministry, and also for the council in Archdiocese of Dubuque since 2006. Anthony Digmann, welcome to Hands On Apologetics.
Thanks, Gary. It's great to be back.
Yeah, it is. I so enjoyed our last conversation where you were talking about how you engage in apologetics, especially young people, and you were talking about your program, and you mentioned that instead of starting with proof text for the papacy or something like that, you really get hardcore and go straight to science, proofs for God, that kind of thing. How did that start?
Absolutely. So, the course that you're referring to, I teach theology at a Catholic high school. I have sophomores and seniors, and the senior theology program in the spring semester is an apologetics course to prepare those kids to get out into the world, be able to answer questions, and give them an opportunity, I think, to explore questions that they may have personally before leaving our doors and heading out into the world. And I started at 11 years ago, was my first year teaching there, and I began that apologetics course basically doing a Catholic-style apologetics, basically Catholic Protestant dialogue. What are the most common questions that they may ask us, and how do we deal with those? But within maybe the first, second, third year, I had students saying, I understand what you're trying to do, but I'm just not sure I really believe in the faith. I'm not sure if science disproves a religion. I'm not even sure that there's a God. Can that even be shown? Is there any evidence for God, or is that just a pure faith thing, a blind faith thing? What about Christianity? What about all the other world's religions? So my students, with their great questions, forced me to take a few steps back. I was taking too much for granted, I realized, and my apologetics with them needed to start much more foundational. So I end up walking them through kind of a three-part series. So we look at what evidence do we have for God? Why be a theist as opposed to an atheist? Why be a believer in God? Second step is why be a Christian? And then the third step is, if you make it that far, why be a Catholic? So I hammered that out with them. Now, in that first step, can we believe in God? Is there evidence for God? One of the primary issues that comes up that I've learned that I have to deal with as a preamble to the question of God's existence is the question of science and religion, or faith and theology, faith and reason, okay? So that I found was very foundational. Before you start talking about the God piece, you really have to tackle this one, because there's this enormous misconception in our culture that science and religion are opposed to one another, that you basically have to pick. And that's motivated by a couple of worldviews, I believe, materialism and fundamentalism, that pit those two against each other. And we see it in American media, people talking about books, on street corners. There's this general assumption that that's the case, that they can't work together, that they're at odds. And that continues to be propagated by those two sides. But thanks be to God, we as Catholics, we're right in between. Right? We're able to embrace the truths of science and also the truths of faith as revealed by God. We do not see those as contradictory. So I found that as a very important fundamental piece to start these students with and open their eyes a little bit to, well, wait a second. Maybe some of the things that I've learned from society are not true. Here's some real evidence why it's not true. And then I take them from there.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. It's interesting you say that there's those two poles of materialism. But on the other hand, you have Protestant fundamentalism that pretty much sees science as kind of like exterior to Christianity. Some actually see science as a kind of deception.
Absolutely, right. So, there's even denominations that prefer their clergy or their ministers, if you will, not attend upper-level education because they don't want them to be going through four-year university, a liberal arts education, getting foundational education in the sciences. They don't want that because they're concerned that that's going to liberalize them and prevent them from understanding the core truth of the simple gospel, the simple truth of the Bible, which is, you could say, an oversimplification, from a Catholic point of view. There's a variety of perspectives that we take on Scripture. As Catholics, it's difficult, right? A fundamentalist, it's literal translation, pretty much everywhere except for John chapter 6 when Jesus is talking about the Eucharist and it really is his flesh and his blood. All of a sudden, then that's not a literal something that you literally translate. But by and large, fundamentalism is pretty simple. Basically, is that all the Bible, the words, everything that's taught is literally true. Now, that's an oversimplification, I'll say, because it doesn't take into consideration where the human author is really coming from. It doesn't take into consideration the different types of writings within Scripture. For example, the Psalms, which are not meant to be, they weren't intended to be historical, whereas like 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, were intended to be historical. Luke's gospel is fantastic because it begins. Luke says, "Look, I've investigated this stuff. I've talked to eyewitnesses. And I'm putting it together for you in an orderly fashion, so that you may be sure of what you're reading is true." So some of the books, the authors intended to be very, very literal, right? But other books are not intended to be so. They're much more metaphorical. Okay, there's definitely a theological truth in them, but not necessarily meant to be read literally. Like if I say, if I'm writing a blog or something like that, and I say, on my way, driving to school or whatever, it was raining cats and dogs. And 200 years from now, somebody from another country, different language, they read that and they're like, it's raining cats and dogs. Wow, 200 years ago in Iowa, where I live, did it really rain cats? This doesn't make sense. What does that mean? Well, as the author, I don't intend that literally, and my audience knows that. If I start off with a certain wording like once upon a time, it's a fairy tale. That there's going to be a message, an important takeaway from that story, but that it wasn't a literal event that took place, right? So back in Old Testament, various eras, New Testament era, there are different linguistic tip-offs, if you will, that will give a reader of that era the idea of, well, wait a second, this isn't necessarily historical fact, but there is a theological meaning that I need to take away. There is a moral to the story, or what have you. So it depends. So as Catholics, but biblical interpretation is much more challenging. We are forced to look, what are the historical events that are going on? Who is the author? Where are they coming from with this? What is their intention? Like, we really have to get inside their head and say, what is God trying to reveal to us as the truth that he wants us to know from this biblical text? Should we take it literally? Should we take it symbolically? Maybe we should take it as both, because there's definitely times where it's both. There's a literal event going on, and there's also a metaphorical idea that we need to take from it as well. I'd like to share, if I may, right on this topic, from Vatican II. It was very clear, and it's in the Catechism, it's very clear that as Catholics, we do believe that the Bible is without error. But we're very careful with how we mean without error. Whereas a fundamentalist would say the Bible is without error historically, it's without error scientifically, okay? It's without error in what God wants us to know for salvation. They would say it's without error, period. The Catholic would say, well, the Bible is definitely without error in what God wanted us to know for salvation. That's the key component. Okay, and that's God's primary motivation. At the end of the day, Gary, at the end of our life, it doesn't matter whether or not we know exactly how the world started. It doesn't matter. Was it Big Bang? Was it evolution? Was it God created in 6 days? That really doesn't matter for our salvation, right? So God's motivation is not to make sure that we have all that stuff hammered out. What's most important to God, especially with the sacred scriptures, is that we know what we need to know for salvation, develop a relationship with him, that we can go to heaven and take as many people as possible with us. So that's, as we understand it as Catholics, again, Vatican II and the Catechism state that we do believe that the sacred scripture firmly, faithfully, and without error teaches the truth that God, for our salvation, the truth that he wished to see confided in the sacred scriptures. But that's the key component, okay, for our salvation, what we need to know. So take the Adam and Eve story, for example. Okay, the author, wasn't there. We don't believe as Catholics that God was whispering in the ear of the authors of the various books of sacred scripture, telling them exactly which word to put down. They were independent agents to a degree. So God gave them the idea, the truth that he wanted to see confided in the scriptures. And then they were able to write with their humanness, which is why some biblical authors write, for example, let me take Luke from the New Testament, for example, writes complex. St. Paul writes very complex. They have complex grammar, complex sentence structure. They were gifted with language and with writing, whereas other authors were not so gifted with it was more simple. Okay, it's like the difference between reading maybe a high school senior essay versus a sixth grader essay. Okay, both can relay truth, but you're also going to see the humanness of the author in the way that truth is passed on to us. So it's very important as Catholics that we realize biblical interpretation is not necessarily as easy as our fundamentalist brothers and sisters would claim, that to really get to the truth of it, it's going to be a little bit more complex.
Yeah, very good. So when you start your class, is there any prerequisites that you're going to assume, like when you start talking about the existence of God and so on, that you assume they already know that you can build upon?
Yeah, so most of my students have had 12 years of Catholic education, elementary school, middle school, high school.
Okay.
But what I've learned at that point is that many of them are questioning everything, about their faith or other. Some are pretty solid, but there's a good number that are either they've already jettisoned it and they've said, you know what, I'm really not sure that I can believe in this. I don't feel like there's good evidence for it. Some are clinging to it with a blind faith, and some are kind of, I'd say most, are in between with an openness. They'd love to explore it some more, but they've not really had the resources to do the exploration, not really been presented with evidence, if you will. So I really look at that class as an opportunity to really tackle that and to dig in and look at that evidence. So I launch right in with them and share, for example, scientists. They don't, at least in the past, the founding scientists, Newton, for example, okay, even Galileo. I share a quote from Albert Einstein where he says, "Science without religion is lame, and religion without science is blind. Science without religion is lame, and religion without science is blind." Scientists are open to not necessarily all the materialist scientists today that may be out there, but I would say that a number of believing theistic scientists are on the rise, especially in the last 70 years or so since the Big Bang Theory was proposed. Are coming
very
around
good.
to the likelihood.
I hear the music starting. Hold that thought. You're talking with Anthony Digmann about faith and science. This is Hands-On Apologetics. Stay tuned, folks. More on the other side of the break.
This is Terry Barber reminding you there's a women's conference coming up September 7th, 2019 at the Sacred Heart Chapel. Mary Danielle Barber will be speaking along with Barbara Nicolosi. They're going to be talking about true femininity. Be who you are. This is going to be for your daughters, your mothers. Every woman should be at this conference. And the way to do it is go to virginmostpowerfulradio.org or call 877-526-2151. Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We are chatting with Anthony Digmann, apologist extraordinaire, about his curriculum on how to teach high school level children apologetics, and he dives right into theistic apologetics. And sorry, Anthony, I heard the music coming up. I kind of had to interrupt you, but I think so. You start the curriculum with basically showing that even scientists recognize there's no conflict between faith and reason. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And a lot of the founding scientists were certainly great believers in God. Newton, for example,
right.
Galileo. It goes on and on and on. But also from a religious point of view, Catholics recognize the same thing. I mean, Pope St. John Paul II said, faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth. And you can pretty much reinsert for faith and reason, you can pretty much reinsert, our theology, divine revelation, and science for reason, right? So our theology and science, they're like two wings on which the human spirit can rise to the contemplation of truth. And really, God is the author of all truth, right? God cannot lie. God cannot deceive. So God gave us both of these. He gave us divine revelation. He gave us theology. He gave us our faith in the church. Okay, so that's not going to deceive us. But he also gave us reason. Okay, and science operates off of our reason. We look at the natural world. We run tests, experiments. Science develops, right? It's a gradual unfolding of what we're able to discover and test and discern from looking at the natural world, which is not divinely revealed. Again, this is not something that we absolutely need to know for salvation, but God still gives us reason in order to understand ourselves and the natural world around us. So these two things cannot be in conflict because God gave us both. Right? If there is an apparent conflict, we need to take a look at how are we interpreting this thing. Where the error must be in us, or maybe inconclusive evidence from the science point of view. Maybe we're misinterpreting something from divine revelation that's creating the conflict. So
yes.
I really like to get in with my students some concrete examples, which tend to be super, super helpful with things that they're exploring. And one of my favorite, almost like a proof argument, if somebody approaches me or, one of my students and says, Catholicism and science, they really don't get along at all. Science and religion can't go together. As a Catholic, one of my favorite things to bring up is the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. Okay, this is an elite group of scientists founded by the Pope. It actually started in 1603 under Pope Clement VIII, but it was under a different name. It kind of came in and out of existence over time, but it was the world's first exclusively scientific academy. Okay, and it's under the auspices of the Pope, right? So he even funds them. Right?
Right.
They have 80 members at any given time. And somebody might say, well, these scientists, these are obviously hand-selected by the Pope, and they're only puppets, right? And the Pope's the puppeteer, and he makes these scientists say what he wants them to say so that they'll, be propagating these Catholic ideas out in the scientific community. That's not true at all. So they have 80 members at any given time. They're chosen regardless of gender, country, religion, their race, etc. They want this to be an elite group of scientists who are able to operate on their own. The Pope gives them freedom to select what topics they want to explore, etc. And I think one of the most convincing pieces of evidence for why I would really call this the most elite group of scientists in the world is that since 1902, they have had 76 Nobel laureates among their members. And about half of those 76 Nobel laureates came from they were current members of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and then received the Nobel Prize. But the other half actually received the Nobel Prize first and then joined the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. Were invited to join the Pontifical Academy. Now, if you're a Nobel laureate, okay, if you made a huge contribution to the world of science, okay, as a scientist to our entire world, I mean, write your paycheck, pick what college you want to go to, what job do you want to have, how do you want to continue to contribute, I mean, like, the doors are wide open for you as a Nobel laureate. And many, like dozens since 1902, have chosen to join the Pontifical Academy of Sciences as a lifetime member. I mean, that's amazing, right?
Yeah.
That these people would want to do this. So the fact that the Pope and the Vatican has this group of elite scientists in place who continue to do huge contribution, great work amongst the sciences, among the sciences, is, I think, a wonderful example that we can just toss out. If you're in an elevator with somebody and you're wearing some pin of the Blessed Virgin or the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and they're like, "Oh, I know that. You're a Catholic." Well, I left the church years ago. I'm an atheist now. I don't believe in it. Science and religion can't get along. Quick toss back, right? If you're in an elevator and you have 20 seconds, hey, what about the Pontifical Academy of Sciences? You can throw out a couple of things in that ballpark, and that conversation can twist really, really fast. Just getting them thinking outside of this myth, this lie in our culture that science and religion cannot get along. And I love the Pontifical Academy of Sciences.
Yeah, and like you said, it stretches back to the 1600s, and with the church has always been a major patron of the sciences, because, like you said before, it's really just a different way of knowing God through reason that's ultimately in harmony with revelation.
Absolutely. I really like with my students to bring up some conflicting stories and things like that. It just kind of gets their antenna up. They want to see drama and what's going on. Of course, reality TV shows are predicated on that idea. But really, with the science and religion argument, especially within Catholicism, and you were referring back to early scientists and how the church has always helped the sciences get going. It really has. But there's one event from history that people like to point at, and it's the Galileo controversy, right? Okay, so to give the audience just a real quick summary of this situation, Galileo, he actually was the head of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences for a while. Again, it didn't have that name back then, but he headed that scientist. But he proposed this idea, and it wasn't his own. Copernicus actually had the idea first, but he didn't spread the idea widely. But Galileo was trying to demonstrate that the Earth was the center of the universe instead of the sun. So geocentrism instead of heliocentrism, which we know now, of course, is off as well. The sun is not the center of the universe either. It's not even the center of the Milky Way galaxy, for crying out loud. But, our mind needed to expand gradually over time. And there's this big backlash against the church. This is how it gets painted, that, the church silenced Galileo and prevented him from doing any more science, and, even locked him in a tower of a castle until he starved to death and got sick, or, whatever. All kinds of stories that go around. So what actually happened with the Galileo situation? He was proposing this idea of heliocentrism, that the sun was at the center, not the Earth, that the Earth goes around the sun rather than vice versa. And there were a number of cardinals within the Catholic Church that were very uncomfortable with this idea because they interpreted parts of Scripture literally. They interpreted like fundamentalists. I believe it's Psalm 93. I'd have to look that up to verify, but it talks about the Earth being fixed and unmovable, and they interpreted that literally. Now, Galileo actually had better theology than some of them. But to be fair, he also took this theology from a man named Cardinal Baronius at the time, who said, the Bible teaches us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. The Bible teaches us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go, which is really how the church would understand this today, much more clearly, that the Bible is designed to teach us what we need to know for salvation, not what we need, of all of perfect history, or definitely not what we would have to know perfectly for the sciences, right? Even though there is great science and there's amazing history in sacred Scripture, I'm not trying to take that away at all, but I'm just trying to be clear about how we interpret Scripture in comparison to how a fundamentalist would interpret Scripture. So there was a number of cardinals. There was 10 on this panel, and 7 of them chose to put Galileo under house arrest and tell him that he was not allowed to continue teaching and publishing on this idea of heliocentrism. Okay, but to be fair to the situation, Galileo could not conclusively prove his position. Most scientists did not believe Galileo, did not believe that the sun was the center of the universe, or in our case, the solar system as we understand it today. So he didn't even convince the scientific community of his theory at this point. So the church wasn't way out of line. Galileo didn't have solid evidence. Within a century, that evidence came out and the scientific community shifted, et cetera. Okay?
Right.
But Galileo was put under house arrest. He had a visitor who visited him. We still have a surviving letter from him that said Galileo had every convenience. He was able to continue with the scientific research, continue to publish on other topics, but he wasn't able to continue propagating this idea of heliocentrism. Okay, because that's what some members of the church were concerned about. But there was another 3 cardinals on that group that, I don't know what you call it, it wasn't a council, but that group of cardinals that was looking into the Galileo case, who refused to condemn him, right? Didn't believe that there was a problem there. So it was really kind of a mess. And Pope St. John Paul II had the whole situation reinvestigated a couple, 2, 3, 4 decades ago, and basically apologized on behalf of the church that the church made some mistakes. Galileo wasn't perfectly prudent in all of his decisions during that situation either, but the formal apology centuries later, of better late than never, I guess, but it's still ridiculously late on the church's behalf, did apologize for the situation. And today, I think Catholics are able to see with more clarity what's going on here. But that Galileo situation, that drama, people throw that out. Oh, the church is bigoted against science, et cetera. That's not true at all, right? There was a big miscommunication. There were problems going on. Tempers got flared and personalities clashed. Yeah, it was not good, and the church made mistakes. And the church later has apologized for those mistakes. But the church has never been opposed to science, straight up. And again, Galileo didn't have absolute proof at that point for even his scientific position. So I think that needs to be clear. Yeah,
that's a really important point too, because he was basically he was saying that that the Earth revolving around the sun was a proven fact, and that the church had to change its teachings to square with that fact. And like you said, I mean, even his friends, even his friends on the Inquisition, who were for him and for the theory, knew that he didn't prove it, and that he was really going out of his league as more of a propagandist rather than a scientist.
Yeah, so it was a real mess.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and we're still, and you're right, this is like something that is just thrown up like, oh, what about Galileo?
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Very good.
Very true.
Well, yeah, I hear the music coming up, so we're coming up to another break. We're talking with Anthony Digmann, folks, about explaining apologetics, talking to high school level students about the existence of God, science, and faith. More on the other side of the break. This is Hands on Apologetics. Stay tuned.
This is Terry Barber reminding you there's a women's conference coming up September 7th, 2019 at the Sacred Heart Chapel. Mary Danielle Barber will be speaking along with Barbara Nicolosi. They're going to be talking about true femininity. Be who you are. This is going to be for your daughters, your mothers. Every woman should be at this conference. And the way to do it is go to virginmostpowerfulradio.org or call 877-526-2151. Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE, US 1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, to Hands-On Apologetics. We are chatting with Anthony Digmann about faith, science, and, training young people to explain and defend the faith. And Anthony Digmann has classes in apologetics, high school level apologetics, and we're working through the beginning of that three-part series of introducing science, faith, and God. And Anthony, so you established that from the church's perspective, from science perspective, there is no conflict. And then right before the break, we were talking about Galileo, which is usually the big canard that comes up as a sign that there is a conflict. Where do you go from there?
Yeah, so again, concrete examples are really, really helpful with young people, and especially just loading them up on those examples and stuff. So where I go from there, I've got several favorite Catholic scientists, or those who have at least made a huge contribution to science and were also Catholic. So one of the first ones I talk about, this is a 17th century man. He's actually a blessed Nicholas Steno. He also goes by the name Niels Stenson. He was a leading anatomist of his day. He has 4 parts of the body named after him. He was one of the founders of modern geology. Okay, so incredibly successful scientific contributor, right? He was a Lutheran. He actually converted a little bit later in life, became a Catholic, became a priest, eventually became a bishop, and he actually left his life of science behind. And he gave a last public lecture, and here's a quote from his last lecture. He said, "Beautiful is what we see. More beautiful is what we comprehend. Most beautiful is what we do not comprehend." So he took these steps from, huge contributor to the sciences, right? 4 parts of the body named after him, the founder of geology, right? Discovers the faith, becomes more religious, and says, you know what? I'm more passionate about this. This is actually even more important. It's like what I was talking about earlier, God, what do we really need to know the most? Well, we need to know for salvation. That's even more important than what we know about sciences. Of course, God gave us reason to discover the sciences and all that kind of stuff as well, and instruct those. But most important is the faith component. Right? So I love this blessed Nicholas Steno. He makes some great contributions, huge contributions to the sciences, of course, but also realize that faith is even more important, and is a Catholic convert, which also has fun apologetic implications.
Yeah, right.
Another is 19th century, Gregor Mendel. Many more people have heard of him. He was actually an Augustinian priest and the founder of genetics. So some fun stuff, huge stuff that you have coming together. And I think perhaps my favorite, because he's one of the more recent ones, again, part of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences that we were talking about earlier, Father Georges Lemaitre. He was a Belgian physicist. He was also a priest, obviously. He was the director of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences for a while. And he's very well known in the scientific community because he's one of the co-founders of the Big Bang Theory. Right. The other one was Alexander Friedman. He was a Russian mathematician. Basically, Father Lemaitre and Alexander Friedman proposed their ideas of Big Bang separately, independently of each other, but during the same time. So they both usually, and I think should, get credit for the discovery. But Father Lemaitre was in Western Europe, so he was actually able to share his findings with Einstein, who did not like the idea of this Big Bang idea. He and most scientists of his era a century ago were much more comfortable with the idea of a universe that was not changing, even a universe that has existed for all eternity, right? Because if you have a universe that has always existed, it doesn't need a creator, and you don't need a God. Okay, so there's a good number of materialist scientists who were very comfortable in that point of view. But when Big Bang Theory gets proposed by Father Lemaitre, and he shares the evidence of his discovery with Einstein, and a lot of that help actually came from an American, Edwin Hubble, discovered the red shift in the stars. So basically, Edwin Hubble discovered some early evidence that showed that the universe really is expanding. Okay, that all the galaxies out there are really moving apart from each other, and it's blowing up like a balloon. Okay, and if it's blowing up like a balloon, then the universe in the past was smaller, like a deflating balloon, if you go back in time. And it goes all the way back to this singularity, is what scientists call it, this point at which all of matter, space, and time launched into existence, popped into existence in this explosion, if you will. So that's Big Bang Theory, right? Now, a lot of religious people are very nervous about the terminology of Big Bang Theory, okay? And I'm not talking about the show, of course, right? But when they hear Big Bang, they go, oh, Big Bang, that's against religion, right? No, not at all. Big Bang is not against religion at all. It was proposed by a Catholic priest, for crying out loud. And two, and maybe the next time I get on the show with you, Gary, we can explore this some more, but I wanted to share a little bit about evidence for God. And the Big Bang Theory actually plays right into evidence for God's existence as a scientific theory supportive of that idea. So that's a great direction to go. But I like to share these, especially these three, Gregor Mendel, Father Lamott, and Blessed Nicholas Steno, because they were huge contributors to the sciences, but also very influential Catholics as well.
Yeah, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? I mean,
is.
there literally is dozens and dozens of bishops and priests and canons and deacons and that have are bona fide, cutting-edge scientists throughout the ages that were faithful Catholics.
Absolutely, and certainly we see this today. You know, we've got great contributors now. I mean, just look at hopefully your doctor maybe is a great contributing. I mean, my doctor in my hometown is an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion on the weekends. You know, I mean, we should see this, right? The Catholics should be the salt of the earth, for crying out loud. All Christians, right? The light of the nations, the salt of the earth. So hopefully we're seeing this all over the place.
Right. In fact, early on, Christians gravitated to medicine. The science of medicine, because, the mandate to care for one another, to love one another, to help the sick. So it's like from early on, Christians were jumping into the sciences as part of their Christian mission.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, key stuff. Key stuff there. Now, I just want to share with your listeners. I'm sorry, the Magis Institute is absolutely fantastic for this work. They're doing some outstanding work on showing, as Catholics, how science and religion work together. They talk about a lot of cosmology, so looking at the universe and even universe evidence for God, but also how science and religion work together. They're just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, we had Father Robert on the show, and you're right. It's
excellent.
It's great, and he's got lots of material that you can download and use it for yourself, or use it. Maybe there's people that want to start apologetic study in their parish. You can go to the Magis Center and download this stuff. It's great. It's all free.
Yeah, it is. It is just absolutely fantastic and fits right into this stuff. So absolutely, definitely recommend.
Yeah. In fact, you know what, Anthony, if I could throw in a couple of factoids for your students. Of course, Copernicus was a canon in the church. He wasn't a priest, but he was a canon. Mm-hmm. And also, Galileo's two illegitimate daughters became nuns. So even Galileo was not against the faith.
Right. I didn't know that. That's wonderful, Gary.
Yeah, you could throw that in, just to shock them. But, if it was, science versus the church, how do you explain that? Obviously, Galileo didn't think it was, that kind of warfare between the two.
Sure, absolutely. And Gary, one of the things that I really enjoy about apologetics at this level and this kind of exploration is when you can overturn myths that are being propagated in society, especially with young people, and show them with concrete examples that, this isn't true. It opens a door to be able to overturn other myths and lies, really, from society about how we deal with money, for example, and how important it is to be generous and give of our time and talents. And it's not all about me and materialism. About morality is huge, about cohabitation, about the sexual immorality that we see all over the place. When you can shake their minds a little bit and help them to see, the church really has a clue about what they're talking about in one area. It opens the door, and relationship building is so important with apologetics at every level, not just teenagers. But if you can build that relationship with them and show them one element of truth with great evidence behind it, it really opens that door where they'll be more likely to say, okay, well, I might not have talked about, for example, my first book, Contraception and Catholicism. I wouldn't have been willing to talk about that subject, but boy, you really kind of rattled my cage on this, and I see where you're coming from with science and religion. Tell me about that contraception thing that Catholics do. That doesn't make sense to me, and it opens a whole other door, and then you can go into that as well.
Yeah, that's an awesome point, right? Because you kind of have to make a crack in this facade, these anti-Catholic myths that's been around for centuries. And once you kind of show that the man behind the curtain, then they can start thinking critically about, well, what else is society shouting at me that's also based on myth and misconceptions?
Exactly. Yeah, I tell my students, you can take almost anything, any value you see in the secular culture. If you flip it on its head, that's probably what the truth is. Take radical materialism, all that kind of stuff. I was sharing with my seniors before they graduated this year. I just took one day and just said, you know what, this is not a theology class. I just want to share some advice with you guys about money, and just some simple advice. For example, I held up my hands, maybe 2 feet apart and said, if you make this much money, and then I shortened it down to about 18 inches. I said, if you make about 2 feet worth of money, spend this much, shorten it down to 18 inches, and say the rest, give, save, for crying out loud, save, be conservative with your money, for crying out loud. Don't live beyond your means. We talked about all kinds of stuff, and that class just blew them away.
Yeah.
Of course, by then I developed rapport with them and a relationship with them, but with apologetics, that's so key.
Yeah, absolutely. So we only have a couple of minutes left. If someone's out there, maybe they're in a parish, they want to start some sort of program, or maybe they work for a Catholic high school or even middle school, and they want to start an apologetics program. What advice can you give them on how to start?
Oh, that's the great question. I personally, my road was to do it myself going in. So I was 18 years old, questioning the faith, spent all the way through college, was looking into the faith, and basically, by the grace of God, discovered that Catholicism was true. So I went into it having explored it all already. So I share my own faith story going in. And then once I got started teaching it to my students, they asked the questions that they needed answers to, and that filled in the rest of the curriculum. I just had to go find the answers, bring it to them, flesh it out, keep working on it. So that's what I'd say is just start, right? It doesn't even have to be formal. Just start, and then they'll fill it in for you with the answers or the questions that they need answered. Very good. Well, Anthony, how can people get a hold of your stuff? Sure. Easiest way to get a hold of me is on my website, anthonydigmann.com, ANTHONY, D as in dog, IGMANN.com. Very good. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate it. Great to be with you, Gary. Have a great one. You too. That's Anthony Digmann, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, check it out, anthonydigmann.com. Just great. It's a great, solid advice for us to use. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to have classical theist John DeRosa come in, and he's going to answer atheist slogans. And coming up next, the Terry and Jesse Show, the show that started it all here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. It's time for me to turn off the dojo lights and shut down the Midwest Command Center, but God willing, we'll talk again tomorrow. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye-bye.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church. So I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.